Welcome to the Expand X podcast with your host, Peter Ashton.
Hey guys, welcome to Expand X here. I'm here with John Ghiorso. I'm super excited for this conversation because I don't know if a lot of people know a little bit about your background, but you've got a pretty amazing story, and I'm super excited to hear about it and share with our audience about your background and also the stuff that you're building right now. I think it's super impressive and super important that people understand, the difference of building a business from raising funds to bootstrapping, and you've got an amazing story. So why don't you just kind of tell our audience a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your background?
Yeah. Thanks for having me on. So I'm an agency guy. So I started an agency in 2008 that was very humble beginnings, but turned into a full service Amazon and e-commerce agency. Grew it over about a decade up to 8 figures in revenue, about 100 people full time, and we were kind of one of the, I would say, premier Amazon full service agencies. We were in Seattle. Had offices on Amazon's campus, and it was a great run. And that was like my life for a decade, was being just steeped in Amazon and e-commerce. I sold it to a global marketing services firm in 2020. I stayed on for about 2.5 years to do the earnout and integration. And then kind of towards, I think it was like the very end of 2023, I left, retired, intentionally retired, got bored, and fairly recently launched a new venture where I'll be founding and bootstrapping 5 distinct agencies over the next 2 years.
That's amazing. I want to start a little bit on how you even got started in this business, because most people don't just wake up one day and say, hey, I'm going to go start an agency and build it and do the stuff that you've done. So how did you, going back from high school and college and the integration of like, who got you into the business? How'd you learn about it? What's your backstory there?
Yeah, man. So I had an easy in. So my late dad had a it's kind of an old term now, but it was a manufacturer's rep firm. So it was a company that basically, the best way to think about it is he was basically an independent consultant for a handful of consumer product brands. I graduated college in 2008. It was the middle of the Great Recession, and I could not find a job. I didn't plan on working for my dad, but I didn't want to starve. So I moved back home, and we created an arrangement where I could work on commission if I was able to get some of the brands that he had relationships with up and running on Amazon. Now, keep in mind, this is 2008, so Amazon is not nearly what it is today in that era. It's actually, a lot of consumer products looked at it as kind of this like sketchy garage sale site. It was closer to eBay than it was like, this massive global tech company retail powerhouse. So what I realized is there was kind of an opportunity to professionalize on behalf of the brands the kind of approach to Amazon. So I started this, had a couple, brands kind of under my belt because they were my dad's clients. And I pretty quickly realized there was a bigger opportunity to essentially sell Amazon expertise as a service. I had a background in college of doing door-to-door sales. That was like my summer job in college. So I basically took that kind of skill set, if you want to call it that, and applied it to this new endeavor. And I started going to these trade shows. There's like a trade show for every category. There's a hardware trade show and a housewares trade show and a sporting goods trade show. There's like dozens of them. And so I started going to these trade shows, and I kind of used a framework and the approach I learned from doing door-to-door sales to talk to literally thousands of brands a year. And, I signed like 20 of them. Kind of, classic funnel, but my own kind of scrappy version of that. I signed maybe 20 or 30 of these brands pretty quickly, realized it was a bigger opportunity, bought out my dad, had a conversation around that, and then, functionally founded this Amazon agency. Even back then, it wasn't really an agency. It was basically like a couple services and, me, and then hired a person and then hired a second person. And then over a period of years, right, kept signing more clients, kept kind of adding more services as Amazon got more complicated and there was more demand. And then again, about over a decade, like that became over time a full service agency. But, it's easy for people to like look back on their, on their kind of long arc of their entrepreneurial journey or career and go like, oh, this is exactly what I was like going to do. I mean, it was, in the early days, it was a hustle, right? Like it was a way to like make some cash and stack up some, recurring revenue. And it was just me and yeah, so pretty humble beginnings.
What was the time frame that you bought your dad out? Because how did that conversation come about? It's like, hey, Dad, you're not doing it right. I know I can do it better. Was it like, I'll let you retire? Like you were using the commissions, I'm assuming, that you made to then buy him out.
Correct. Yeah. It was, I mean, he was super supportive. He was on his way to retirement anyway. And it was a way to sort of, buy him out based on the future earnings of the business. So it was kind of like an obvious thing for him. And I was frankly chomping at the bit to just like make it my own thing and run it. And he had his business still. So we kind of like split my thing, which was the Amazon thing. And then I, again, this is like, it's small, right? It's like it's a 6-figure business at this point with like 1 or 2 employees, I think. And, and then from there, I kind of made that into this, really Amazon focused full service Amazon agency. And, things kind of took off from there.
When you were building it, going from, 1 or 2 employees to 100, right? How did you handle the culture of your company? Because in finding the right people to, a lot of times, it's sometimes you've heard it takes a different level of management to take you from, 10 million to 100 million. And so was there a point that you either had to move management or add new people that had different skill sets? Did you hire anybody from another company? Like, how did you think about building your team and your company to scale?
Yes, all of those things. The overarching concept though, and you mentioned this, culture is incredibly important in a company, especially when you get to the size where everyone doesn't directly work with the founder all the time. If your company is 6 people, it's a company, but it's like a group of people doing stuff together in the same room. Even if it's not literally the same room, if you're virtual, it's still, everyone knows you. It's just like, what would John do? What would the founder do? Right? Like it's very intuitive. The culture is just you. It's just you. You're in every conversation. There's a point maybe around 10, 15, 20 people where like, everybody. It's not a big company, but like they don't work directly with you on a regular basis. That's the point at which as a founder, you need to become very deliberate about your culture. And to put that into like practical steps, to me, it means defining values, like, and not like, oh, integrity and hard work. I mean, sure, right? But like, those are pretty standard things everyone should have. I mean, like what actually sets you apart? How do you want your company to be unique? How do you want it to feel? How do you want people to act? And it's not just about creating values and like putting them on the wall and like looking at them once a year. You create values and then you make all your major decisions based on them. You hire based on them, you fire based on them, you promote or don't based on them. You have real, serious, meaningful conversations and make real, serious, meaningful decisions based on those values, right? And that is how you create a cohesive and strong culture that has no upper limit to scale. Amazon has done this, right? They have over 1 million employees and every single one of those people understands their leadership principles. Those are their values and they come directly from Jeff Bezos and they are, and I know this because I used to work with them very intimately, they're ingrained at every level of that company. So there's no upper limit to this, but it does have to be deliberate.
So, one thing I've always wondered is, when you're dealing, because I've never worked for a big corporation. I've always either started my own companies or, again, I had it easy in, being in business with, the guy his family started Dragon Ball Z. So it was easy, kind of like you said. But, what he had mentioned is you guys have different business styles of, when it comes to the culture of like, and a lot of other founders probably, they struggle with this. And it's a big question for people is how do I determine my culture? And when it comes to either do you have to fire somebody, one big thing that, I'm wondering from you is when people made decisions or they didn't fit, did you try to shape them towards your culture, or did you just say, hey, you don't fit, and you easy like rip the Band-Aid off and move on quickly to hire somebody new?
So you need to evaluate people. You need to be as objective as possible when it comes to evaluating people. This pertains to both people you're thinking about hiring and people that are already working for your company. You need to evaluate them based on values, but that's not enough, because someone can be a values fit, but they can have other missing things that are not letting them do the job, right? So you need to figure out values, and then you basically need to figure out what are the competencies required for the job. So, and you need to evaluate people in both of those domains. And the way I think about this is values are things that really don't change. I mean, they're formulated in like childhood or maybe in high school and college, but like for the most part, you're not like, I'll give you a tangible example here, right? I've always felt that ownership is a really important value in a company. So the idea that everyone just feels this like intense sense of ownership about their domain, right? You can't really teach that. It's just sort of a thing someone's wired that way or they're not. Competencies, however, can absolutely be taught. These are technical skill sets. These are like things that can be trained and learned and understood, right? So for me, someone has to be a values fit. If they're not, they can't be at the company, period, full stop. Doesn't matter what competencies they have. It's binary. They have them or they don't. Competencies are more nuanced. You should hire for competency, right? Unless you are like hiring junior people and you're willing to put them through a 6-month training program, that's fine. If that's what you do, Enterprise Rent-A-Car does that, that's great. They hire for values and then they train, that's fine. Most companies, especially small ones, you kind of need someone who can like do the job day one. But then if you find that there's, the role is changed or there's like a somewhat of a deficit in competency, then you have to say, okay, can we train for this? Can they level up? Like, can we work with them? And you should do that if they're a values fit, because that's like, they're good people, right? And like, you should try to work with them. Sometimes the role changes so quickly or a new role, is invented, et cetera, and they're just not going to make it. And then, you usually have to make a tough decision there. But like, there's nuance to this, and you should try to genuinely evaluate everyone in very objective ways. They should also have full transparency into this. What are the values? What are the competencies? How are they rated? Is that changing quarter over quarter, et cetera? And then when someone's not a fit, you have to make a decision quickly, right? Like, so you need rigorous, like, objective, qualitative and quantitative data around people, and then you make decisions. You just make them when you make them. As soon as the data changes, you make a decision, right? Like, there's so much
You're exactly
voodoo spinning around that happens in company. I like this person, I don't, but I don't know, they messed this thing up. I'm not sure. Are they good? Or that? Like, it creates a huge amount of inefficiency and chaos.
Or like, he's my friend, she's my friend. We grew up together. They're not performing, but I don't want to ruin the relationship. I think it's different for each company of how they build. I've always said that if you go into business with somebody who your friend, sometimes it doesn't work out. Most of the time it doesn't work out. If you go into business and they become your friend, it actually works out.
I agree with that.
So 10 years building this up, was there a year that, that just exploded, that really put you on the map to start getting, or was it like a gradual year by year, 20% growth, and just over time you built it? Or was there like, 1 or 2 years where you just weren't performing and then something clicked and then all of a sudden your revenues just, tripled?
Yeah. So there were basically 2 phases of the business, and I'm using some kind of rough numbers here, but basically the first 5 years, it was more or less a lifestyle business. Now, it was a very profitable, actually pretty quickly growing lifestyle business. It was a good business, but fundamentally, like, it was a delivery team. We didn't really have a sales and marketing. We didn't have a growth org at all, right? It's pretty scrappy, 7-figure business, profitable. I realized at some point, I think this is around like 2016, I realized that the industry was going to get more competitive. A lot of new players were jumping in. Big companies were starting to acquire my independent competitors. They were also spinning up their own teams, putting a lot of resources into it. you also had a bunch of like solo kind of consultants that were nipping at our heels, and everything was going to get squeezed. I kind of saw that happening. So what I decided to do is, our kind of reputation and kind of organic growth and like referrals, it just wasn't going to be enough to get us to the next level. So around that period of time, I decided, okay, it's time to make this a real company. And I went from having no growth team to about a 10-person growth team. And I think about a year, I kind of scaled that up. And that's when the top line growth really started to accelerate. And, it served me very well. I think at that point, then I sold the company 4 years later. But yeah, it went from being kind of like, I don't want to say coasting. It was always a serious thing, but just sort of like taking whatever kind of came in the door to being like, okay, we have a growth operation. We're scaling this. We're systematizing it. And yeah.
And I see this all the time with lifestyle businesses where they're just like, I'm going to work, 4, 5, 6 hours a day, still make the same money, and just kind of go do what I want to go do, go take the vacations I want. When you decided to hire those 10, growth people, did that change your like, oh, I really could sell this company? Like, were you trying to sell it, or were you just like, well, I can really sell this? And then you started really getting into the operating mode of like, these next 2-3 years are critical. And, were you cutting costs, or were you just trying to drive revenue as fast as possible to get you to an exit?
The nice thing about an agency is they should be profitable, right? Like, so
yeah.
If you grow it quickly and you do it the right way, you don't have to grow to an exit, but it gives you optionality because you win either way, right? If you pull this off and you build an 8-figure agency, you either have an 8-figure business that has a 20 to 30% net margin, which is a great business to own and makes a lot of money, or you have a business that you can sell, and you have either option. So my goal was to create something that gave me that optionality. And then at that time, like 4 years later, I just said, I think it's time to, the stars are aligned. I think it's time to exit. So it wasn't like, it wasn't growth just to get to a point where I could sell, but it was growth to like, just make the thing more lucrative of an endeavor in general. And then I would say later, I was like, okay, I think it's timing's right. And it was COVID, and there was a lot of like, just odd things that kind of converge where it was like, it's time. So
how was that transition period from, doing things yourself, having, your control, and then get bought, and you got 3 years of, hey, I do this, because they're trying to use your revenue, right, to enhance their parent company. So how was that?
Yeah, I mean, so we were actually a relatively small company. So we were acquired by a company called Media Monks. We were one of, I think, 32 companies that were acquired over about a 3-year period of time. We weren't the smallest, but we were in probably the bottom 20%. So a lot of the companies were 500-person, 1,000-person agencies. So we became part of this much bigger thing very quickly. And, the acquisition was strategic, meaning like, they were acquiring us to basically add this commerce capability into the sort of general mix of a full service global marketing services. And, that was successful. To answer your specific question, I think I got a little bit lucky. I had a good experience with Media Monks. My boss was also a founder, and he was not like, he didn't tell me what to do, right? Like it was like very much a partnership. So I didn't feel like, oh God, I have a boss, this is horrible. Like I never had that vibe. I really liked everyone I worked with. Yeah, there was some, turf stuff and some politics, but I can be pretty diplomatic. So that really didn't bother me that much. I think I've heard horror stories, by the way, about like other agencies and acquisition.
I have too.
So like, So like, I almost feel like, wow, I got pretty lucky, with choosing the right acquiring company. At the end of the day, like I'm not a work for a big company guy, but that's not because I didn't have a good experience with that company. If that makes sense. That's just more of like a me thing. Mm-hmm. So.
And 3 years in, retired, I'm assuming you hated it and got bored, right? Because of your ability to, be in the entrepreneur space. You are a true bred entrepreneur where, you don't need anybody else's money to build a business. And I think that is very rare in today's age. Everybody's in the business of raising money. They're not in the business of building companies. And I think it's a huge topic that, at least for us in ExpandX, that we're going to be highlighting is the difference between raising venture dollars to actually bootstrapping companies and being lean and mean, and the rewards that both of them have. Right? There are benefits to both of them, but it's always great hearing different perspectives on it. So what'd you do during retirement? Did you play golf? Did you travel? What'd you do?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I hated it, but it was sort of generally unfulfilling.
Yeah.
I have 2 young kids, so I couldn't travel around the world, right? I love my home. I love where I live. It's great. Most of my day was great. Like, I would get up in the morning, I would surf, I would come in, I'd cook breakfast, I'd hang out. There was this period of time, and it was like a pretty decent chunk of time, right? It was maybe 5 or 6 hours a day where, like, I was just kind of hanging out in my home office, and I was like, my gears were turning because I can't like turn my brain off, and I had all these ideas, and I would like call people and they wouldn't answer because they're at work. And it was like, this isn't awful, but it was just I did that for about a year, and I looked back on the year, and I did a podcast, I did some stuff, like I kept busy, I did some advisory stuff, right? I wasn't totally idle, but I look back on the year and I said, this is the least I've accomplished since I was 22 years old in a year. And that's okay. Like, I was okay with that. But then I said, do I want 20 more of those between 40 and 60? Is this what I want every year, to just be kind of like hanging around and doing a few things and tinkering? And I just decided, again, just personal thing, right? There's no right answer to this, but I just decided, like, no, I don't want to look back in 20 years when I'm 60 and go, what'd you do for the last 20 years? Kind of hung around.
Yeah. Surf.
So I like building things and doing things and working with smart people, and that it's fun for me. It gets me excited. So I was like, yeah, what is that?
Well,
when you add all that
you're
up,
doing that now.
It's a company.
Yeah.
That's what it is, right? So,
and you're building this new agency now, and not just 1, but 5. And I'm super excited to hear more about that. Yet, how'd you even come up with the idea of building a five agency roll up, or you're launching one, but you're going to have 5 over a 3-year period? How did that conversation start, and what's the goal with that new agency? And did Media Monks lock you up in a non-compete?
So there are some contractual stuff, but I'm steering well clear of those, any kind of contractual issues. I'm jumping into an entirely new domain, right? So my previous domain was e-commerce. These new agencies will all be focused on B2B companies and B2B growth. So when I ran Orca, I was like the Amazon guy, the e-commerce guy, right? That was like my thing, and that was my company's thing, and I, was an expert, right? I did it for 10 years plus. But the thing that I was always the most excited about was not actually Amazon and e-commerce, the domain we were in. It was the growing of the company. Like, when I would like listen to podcasts on Saturday night, because I'm a nerd and, I didn't have anything better to do, right? The podcasts I was listening to were not e-commerce podcasts. They were like growth podcasts and marketing podcasts. And what I was really like, kind of obsessed with and really intrinsically interested in is, how do you grow companies? So these new agencies are all focused on niche elements of growing B2B companies. So the first one is a full service LinkedIn agency. The second one that we're launching in January is an outbound email and social DM agency. We have other ideas that aren't fully formed for agency 3, 4, and 5. But they're all going to basically ladder up to this idea of, how do you accomplish alpha for B2B growth, right? So there's things that you have to do in marketing that basically get you beta. You just kind of have to do them. You need a website. It's fine. Like, it's going to serve its purpose, right? Like, maybe you'll run Google PPC. It's fine. You'll get some leads. Like, but are you going to, 10x your business because of your website or because of Google PPC? No, probably not, right? It's beta. It's just like, you get your average return, you do your average work, you get your average return. That being said, there are some opportunities in marketing today that represent, 10 to 100x results if they are approached in the right way. And those are the opportunities that I'm endlessly fascinated by. And I think there's a big kind of need in the market for like full service kind of plug and play expertise. So you can go just hire these guys and they'll take this thing that is an opportunity and they'll just handle it for you. And like the aim for the agencies we're launching is they do that in these various domains. Also, a byproduct of this is I get to grow multiple businesses, which is like my happy place and the thing I get really fired up and excited to do. I also get to hire really smart, interesting people to help me do this, which is also like very, rewarding for me. So it's just this sweet spot of kind of like things I get to be involved in to make this happen. But I do think there's a big market opportunity in general. And I think there's a real sort of, there's clearly like demand for a lot of these capabilities that isn't being kind of fully supplied by the market today.
How do you view having distribution channels like different social media to other platforms, like, already established distribution channels of taking, companies and products and driving traffic, right? What's your view on that than just kind of doing your traditional advertising across, different platforms?
Yeah. Well, so, the sort of weird meta nature of this business model is that the agencies are focused on B2B growth, right? But the agencies are B2B companies. So we're dog fooding everything, right? Like the agencies are growing themselves and they're using their services to grow the other kind of sister companies. So yeah, I think the two biggest opportunities right now in B2B growth are the two things we're starting with, which is personal brands on social platforms, LinkedIn number one, X number two. And then I think outbound messaging is super, super critical. Of course, there's other levers that matter. Paid matters, it's important. SEO still matters. There's a bunch of other fields. I'm fascinated by kind of contemporary PR, basically what we're doing today, if you want to call it that. But I think you can. I'm fascinated by influencers in a B2B context. So there's some really interesting kind of opportunities out there. But I think it depends on the size of the company, but especially smaller, 7-8 figure B2B companies. In my opinion, they need like a couple channels that they just crush. And I think that's where, B2B companies get rapidly bigger, is they kind of push that distribution. Sure, if you have a founder who's like famous, yeah, that's an easier start, right? But but you don't have to. I mean, I think you can very deliberately curate these things. You don't have to just like stumble into it.
So what's your tech stack like? Because the hard thing is there is so much technology, especially in AI. Are you integrating AI into anything you guys are doing? Because just in our businesses that we have, we try to look at so many different AI tools, and there's always new AI companies coming out. And, how do you take that and integrate that into your business to say, this is the tool that we need to use when there are maybe 10, 20, 30 tools just like that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'll give you my overall thoughts on this, and I won't name specific names just because I'm not the guy that's super close to this. And I think there would be so many names anyway. I don't know if it would be useful, but here's my approach to this. So we're launching this outbound email service, right? There are at least, that we've identified, 150 distinct SaaS companies that we could use to do this basically single thing in marketing, right? That is too many for even really an agency to evaluate, let alone like a marketing team who's doing outbound email as like one of 7 initiatives, right? And you have 150 tools for this one initiative. So it's becoming like totally almost overwhelming. I think at some point you've got to kind of make just decisions and commit and go like, okay, this is the tech stack we're choosing. We're going to run with this for a while unless we have a really compelling reason to move off. But I think AI is going to be the background music for almost everything that happens in almost any domain of business over the next 10 years. It's hyped up in a lot of ways and overused and gimmicky, I think. At the same time, it is radically transforming industries as we speak. So there's this concept of a garage agency. And the idea is basically you can take a traditional service company and model, which has a traditional kind of ratio between revenue and headcount, right? Add 5 more clients, you add another person. That's kind of how this goes. But you can reform that by, instead of, functionally hiring 10 people because, you have 50 more clients, what you do is you hire 3 more people, and then those people have the equivalent of 50 FTEs under them, but those FTEs are AI agents. So, instead of having just this army of doers that you have to hire more and more people, you take the best people in the world, you surround them by the best technology in the world, and then you dramatically force multiply their impact and output. That is a possibility today. It's not evenly distributed. It's not evenly kind of accessible depending on the domain, but I do think that's going to be a very important trend in the world of marketing services, which is like my domain, going forward. So that's something we're very much leaning into. It's going to be a combination of third-party, external tools, as well as some internal technology where we're plugging, directly into the models in some cases, and basically building our own kind of internal SaaS to very specifically deploy some of this stuff. And that's going to be an ongoing. I've always had this kind of agnostic view, right? Like, if there's a third-party tool, use it. If you need to build it yourself, build it. If you built the thing yourself and there's a third-party tool that's better, don't fall into the sunk cost fallacy, deprecate it, use the third-party tool, vice versa, same thing, right? So like, as an agency, it's your responsibility to have the most cutting-edge technology, because that directly impacts the experience and the results that your clients have. So it's on you. And I think there's too much people get too caught up in like, this is the tool we use, we're always going to use this tool, or we built this tool, so we have to use it for the next 5 years. It's like, no, market's far too dynamic for that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a hard balance to try to, do you want to vertically integrate and own everything yourself? Does that add value to your business if you're planning on selling, or do you outsource everything? What are the pitfalls in outsourcing? There's a hard balance of, knowing what to outsource and what to build. And you're right. If you build something and it's not as good as this, you don't try to hold on to it, because that, speed to market and speed in a business is honestly the most important thing. Is how fast can I get to something? Because you got to think about, when you're building a business, you got to use data, right? The more data that I have, the more decisions that I can make, the more profitable decisions that I can make. But if I don't make any decisions, I don't have any data, and my business is going to be slow to growth. And so you're exactly right in that. And so let me ask you on some of your on a personal level, right? You're building all these businesses. Do you have any foundations, any nonprofits, philanthropic things that you're passionate about? How do you view that? The nonprofit and the for-profit side.
Yeah, I think it's super important, but I haven't fully wrapped my head around it. I have a donor advised fund, but I haven't done anything with it. If I'm being honest, it's probably kind of like a missing piece for me a bit. But I think my goal is going to be focus more on wealth accumulation over the next, decade. And then, hopefully at some point, God willing, I'll have time later in my life to pivot more to giving it away and focusing on some of those things. So, there's probably I'm sure there's a counter argument to that, like, well, you should give it away now and focus on that now. But it's at least that's my today plan.
Yeah, I think, it's for ExpandX and what we're doing with our company is we really want to try to highlight the difference between nonprofit and for-profits. For the longest time, people have felt the need that, I'm going to build wealth, right? And then turn into a nonprofit afterwards. And then you have some people that say, I'm gonna build my company and build my wealth, and then along the ride, I'm gonna build a nonprofit along. And then you have the third group that says, I'm gonna do them both at the exact same time. And that third group is, I think, something that a lot of people have not really done in a long time. And we're super passionate about trying to, our goal is we really want to try to educate and teach people how to make the world a better place to work. And there's things in there where you could build your business, but also do good in the world kind of at the same time. And, it's a passion of mine. It's a passion of our companies, try to highlight, entrepreneurs and business owners as they're building their business, to try to think about that, we're not asking people to do something about it, just to think about it, because I think it's important to, use your skill set to help the world, right? In a different way than just focusing on the money. And the money is great because it's a tool that allows you to do certain things, but it's also a way to either give back or to help your employees, right? There's some companies that use the money that they make to go out and sponsor events when sometimes there might be some internal things going on with their employees. They need to maybe shift their focus a little bit. So, just curious on your thoughts on that.
Yeah, totally. I mean, one more thing I'll just say on that, and I know this just makes me sound like I'm like a defensive capitalist, but I really do believe that ethically run companies are the greatest force for good in the world. I mean, again, ethically run being the key kind of component there, but capitalism, when it's done right, provides so much upside. It's a win-win, right? Yes, the founders win, but you're creating jobs, you're creating stability, you're giving people health care. I've always felt proud of that, and I would just say that, like, anyone listening to this who's building a company and they're doing it in the right way should feel like really proud of the kind of extrinsic good that business does, right? Like, as long as you're not, dumping pollution into a river behind your factory, like, business for the most part, I think, is really a force for good. And so, people should embrace that.
You're exactly right. And there's nothing wrong with, building companies to build wealth. The idea is, you're exactly right. How can you enhance what you're doing and think about it from an internal, from the internal out, right? Employees, yourself first, your family first, and then, then you really got to take care of your family first. Like that's the first thing. Then you go into your business. So I love what you said about that. And I'm super excited for what you're doing in your new business. Our audience is pretty large, and what we'd like to do is find ways to help you in your business. And we'll be kind of building out that strategy, just kind of push out to our audience to say, hey, how can they add value to your business? We'll post your website. We'll connect. How can people get in touch with you? What's the best way for our audience to say, I want to learn more about what John's doing in his business, because they can help me. Like what they're doing with their new agency can actually help our company. What's the best way for them to reach out?
Yeah, I appreciate it, man. Best place to find me is LinkedIn. That's kind of my home base. So, I have a hard to spell last name, but we can maybe put the link in the the show notes. The first company that's up and running is called Influent Social. So they're influent.co. The other companies are yet to launch. So follow me on LinkedIn, and I'll be announcing those as we roll them out. But anyone who wants to reach out, I'm pretty available. So
awesome. Well, man, it's been a pleasure today. Super excited to follow your journey here. And if there's anything we can do, let us know. And thanks for being on.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Peter.
You got it, man.
Thanks for tuning in to the Expand X podcast. Want to connect and learn more about what we do? Text X to 817-396-7098 and join our growing community today. If you're starting a business, growing a business, or are an investor and want to expand to the X level, reach out to us directly at partner@expandxpodcast.com. Our team is ready to help you take it to the X level. Until next time.